in the heart of medieval Europe, a time stained with superstition, blood, and cruelty. One instrument rose to symbolize mankind's darkest thirst for suffering, the wheel of agony, known also as the breaking wheel. It was not merely a tool of punishment, but a spectacle of power, fear, and divine judgment twisted into iron and wood. Prisoners, sometimes criminals, sometimes innocent souls condemned by corrupt lords or inquisitors, were bound to this colossal wheel, their limbs stretched, shattered, and displayed to the masses. Imagine the chilling echo of bones cracking, the screams echoing through a silent crowd, and the unblinking eyes of onlookers who believed they were witnessing justice unfold. This was more than execution, it was ritualized torment, designed to break not only bodies but also the very essence of human dignity. The wheel was a theater of cruelty, a reminder that in the medieval mindset, death could be art, and pain could be law. The process was as precise as it was horrifying. Victims were laid across wooden beams, their arms and legs stretched wide, exposed, and vulnerable. The executioner, wielding a massive iron hammer, would deliver blows to shatter the bones of the condemned, methodically striking limbs in a gruesome rhythm. Once broken and twisted, the body was interwoven with the wheel's wooden spokes like a grotesque sculpture. Sometimes, the executioner would show mercy by delivering a final blow to the chest or skull, an act ironically referred to as the coup de grace. Other times, no such relief was granted, leaving the condemned writhing in agony for hours, even days, exposed to the elements, scavenging birds, and the prying eyes of society. This slow descent into death was intended to be an unforgettable warning to all who dared defy authority. The wheel was not merely a device, it was a sentence carved into flesh and bone, a living execution written in suffering. Public executions using the wheel of agony were treated as grand events, orchestrated with the same fervor as religious festivals. Townspeople gathered in masses, driven by curiosity, fear, and perhaps a hidden fascination with the spectacle of destruction. Children, elders, merchants, even nobles stood shoulder to shoulder, watching as the condemned screamed against the backdrop of church bells. Priests often stood nearby, preaching that the breaking of bones was symbolic of breaking sin itself, that this punishment was not cruelty, but divine justice. Yet beneath this facade of morality lay a raw truth. Humanity was enthralled by suffering. The wheel became entertainment, a grim performance where the actors were unwilling participants, and the stage was stained with blood. The collective psyche of medieval Europe fed on this darkness, shaping a world where torment was a form of control, and pain was a sermon but who faced the merciless embrace of the wheel. Thieves, murderers, deserters, and heretics were among the most common victims. But the device was not reserved for the guilty alone. Political rivals, scapegoats, and even those accused through whispers of rumor often found themselves bound to its wooden frame. Entire lives could collapse with a single accusation, and once condemned, the wheel became a sentence impossible to escape. It was a punishment of ultimate humiliation to be broken publicly, reduced to nothing but screams and shattered flesh, while your name became a curse whispered in the streets. The wheel stripped victims of humanity, branding them as symbols of dishonor and warning to the living. Yet, ironically, some who died upon it became legends, martyrs whose stories survived the centuries, showing that even the wheel could not completely silence the human spirit. Legends tell of criminals who endured the wheel with terrifying defiance, refusing to cry out even as their bones splintered under iron blows. These tales spread across villages, painting them as almost supernatural figures, men and women whose endurance became myth. The church often twisted these stories into cautionary lessons, but to the common people, they were proof of human resilience against the machinery of cruelty. The wheel thus carried a paradox. It was both a tool of total submission and a stage for resistance. A condemned man who endured without screaming became a shadow that haunted executioners, priests, and rulers, for his silence spoke louder than the shattering of bones. In this way, the wheel of agony etched itself into folklore, its reputation growing beyond mere execution into a realm of superstition and whispered terror. As centuries passed, the wheel became a symbol of ultimate punishment, reserved for the gravest of crimes. Courts announced the sentence with chilling finality: to be broken upon the wheel. In many regions, this punishment was seen as worse than death by hanging, burning, or beheading, for it combined prolonged torture with public shame. Some kingdoms even codified the exact order in which bones should be broken, creating a perverse form of legal choreography around the act of destruction. To read such decrees today is to glimpse into a world where law and barbarity were inseparable, where the suffering of the condemned was meticulously planned, down to the sequence of shattered bones. The wheel was not chaos, it was order in its darkest form, justice carefully crafted to prolong pain, a mirror of mankind's obsession with control through agony. The physical presence of the wheel was as terrifying as the act itself. Massive, iron-rimmed and mounted upon wooden beams, it dominated town squares like a grim monument to mortality. Its creaking echoes, as it was prepared for another victim, struck fear into the hearts of the onlookers. Even in silence, the wheel seemed alive, its looming form whispering promises of torment. When not in use, it stood as a silent guardian of law, a reminder that authority held power not only over life, but over suffering. Birds perched upon its frame, sometimes feeding on the remains of past executions, turning the wheel into both a gallows and a grave. Few dared to walk near it at night, for whispers claimed the souls of the broken still clung to its spokes, crying out for release. The wheel was not just an object, it was a relic of fear. In the shadows of this device lies a chilling reflection of human society, our fascination with suffering, our willingness to justify cruelty as justice, and our capacity to turn agony into ritual. The wheel of agony was not born of necessity, it was born of imagination, a dark invention that sought to amplify pain, to stretch the boundaries of death into a prolonged theater of torment. And though the centuries of its use have passed, its legend remains, whispered in the pages of history and carved into the human psyche. Even now, when the wheel no longer crushes bones in public squares, its memory lingers, reminding us of the abyss humanity once gazed into and, perhaps still does. The wheel of agony, also known as the breaking wheel, was one of the most feared and gruesome instruments of torture and execution in medieval Europe. It was not merely a device of death but a machine of spectacle designed to prolong suffering, to break the body piece by piece, and to leave a lasting imprint of terror in the minds of those who witnessed it. In the shadowed landscapes of the Middle Ages, where the boundary between justice and cruelty often blurred, this wheel became both a weapon of control and a symbol of divine retribution. For rulers justified its use as punishment not only for crimes but also for sins that supposedly corrupted the order of the world. Victims placed upon the wheel were not simply executed, they were transformed into living warnings, twisted figures of flesh and bone, whose agony echoed across town squares as both entertainment and moral lesson. The wheel shattered not only limbs but also spirits, leaving no chance of dignity in death, only horror and despair. The ritual of the wheel began long before the victim touched the instrument itself. Public announcements would spread throughout villages and cities, calling citizens to gather in the square. Market stalls would close, bells would toll, and a crowd of peasants, nobles, children, and priests would gather, all eager or compelled to witness the breaking. The condemned was often paraded through the streets, humiliated, and sometimes tortured even before the wheel was revealed. Shackled and dragged forward, the victim would be forced to stare at the massive wooden construction, a wagon wheel raised on a pole, its edges rimmed with iron, waiting to become both altar and executioner. For many, the sight alone was enough to collapse hope. Mothers fainted, criminals begged for mercy, and the pious whispered prayers. Yet mercy was rarely offered. Once the executioner tied the victim to a wooden scaffold, the breaking began. Limbs smashed with a heavy iron bar, bones fractured in deliberate sequence, first the arms, then the legs, and sometimes even ribs, each blow calculated, each scream prolonged. The goal was never swift death but the orchestration of suffering. Victims were then woven into the wheel itself, their shattered limbs bent unnaturally through the spokes, their bodies resembling grotesque symbols of martyrdom. The wheel would then be hoisted upright, displayed for all to see. Some were left to die slowly of shock, dehydration, or blood loss, a process that could last hours, even days. Crows and dogs circled beneath, waiting for flesh. In many regions, this macabre display was left for weeks, the corpse rotting in the open air, bones exposed to sun and storm alike. The message was clear: this is the price of defiance, heresy, and crime. To see the wheel was to see the embodiment of agony itself, a reminder that life could be crushed as easily as wood splintered under iron. Those who returned home from such a spectacle carried with them nightmares, whispers of screams, and the haunting image of a body broken yet still alive. But behind the cruelty lay layers of symbolism. Medieval societies saw the wheel not only as punishment but as cosmic justice. The circle itself symbolized the cycle of fate, an eternal turning where fortune lifted some and crushed others beneath. To be placed upon the wheel was to be cast into the lowest pit of existence, stripped of honor and body alike. Priests declared that the screams of the condemned were offerings to God, the breaking of bones an earthly reflection of divine wrath. Kings and lords justified the wheel as a necessity, for fear was a tool of order. In times of rebellion or plague, the wheel became even more common, a grim reminder that those who defied authority would be unmade before all. Thus the wheel was not simply wood and iron, but a stage upon which the theater of terror unfolded. Even executioners themselves became legendary figures, known as masters of pain. They were both feared and needed. Some took pride in prolonging torment, boasting of victims who survived long into the night. Others prayed for forgiveness after each strike, believing that their souls too were tainted by the work. In certain towns, executioners developed precise techniques, striking at specific joints to ensure bones shattered but life lingered. Manuals circulated, detailing the order of blows, the science of suffering. The condemned might receive what was called the merciful strike, a final blow to the chest or neck to end life quickly, but only if the crowd or the authorities allowed it. For many, however, mercy never arrived. Death came slowly, like a creeping shadow, as onlookers feasted on the spectacle of decay. This instrument of horror spread across Europe, known in Germany as the radar, in France as the rouet, and in England as the breaking wheel. From the 13th century to the 18th, it remained one of the most dreaded punishments, applied to thieves, murderers, rebels, and heretics. Chronicles speak of entire families condemned to the wheel, of nobles reduced to bloody wreckage before their own subjects, of nameless peasants whose bodies spun like grotesque crucifixes against the horizon. The wheel's notoriety was such that it became engraved in songs, sermons, and folklore. In nightmares, villagers dreamed of turning spokes and cracking bones. In art, demons were often painted driving sinners upon wheels in hell, proof that the instrument itself had become an earthly extension of damnation. As centuries passed, the breaking wheel turned from practice to legend. By the late 18th century, Enlightenment thinkers began to condemn it as barbaric, a relic of darker times. Philosophers like Voltaire and Beccaria demanded its abolition, seeing in it nothing but cruelty disguised as law. Slowly, the wheel was abandoned, though echoes of its horror persisted in memory. Even after its disappearance, tales of the wheel continued to haunt Europe's imagination. Writers described it as the embodiment of mankind's darkest impulses, a symbol of what humans are capable of when fear and power collide. Today, the breaking wheel is remembered not as justice, but as terror and object that reveals how thin the line between civilization and brutality truly is. And yet, the fascination remains. To study the wheel is to stare directly into the abyss of history, to confront the reality that suffering was once a form of entertainment, and that bones were broken not in secret chambers, but beneath the open sky. Every strike of the iron bar was an echo that still lingers in the silence of ruined castles, in the dark corners of museums where rusted wheels sometimes remain, silent yet screaming. The wheel of agony lives on as a warning that cruelty, once normalized, can consume society's whole, leaving behind only shadows and nightmares. If you have reached this point, you too have walked through that abyss. And remember, there are countless other devices, stories, and forgotten tortures that history has buried, waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to this channel, leave your like and share this tale, so together we may continue to explore the darkest corners of human history, where bones and souls were shattered, and where the echoes of pain still whisper across centuries. The wheel of agony, known in the dark annals of history as one of the most terrifying instruments of torture ever conceived, was more than a simple device of punishment. It was a spectacle of fear, humiliation, and ultimate suffering. Emerging during the medieval period, this instrument symbolized the absolute control of kings, inquisitors, and executioners over the flesh and spirit of those condemned. Imagine a massive wooden wheel, resembling those used on carts, but turned into a theater of horror. Victims were tied to its rim, their arms and legs spread apart, and with each strike from a heavy iron club or hammer, bones shattered like fragile glass. The executioners knew exactly where to hit: joints, ribs, shins, and arms, deliberately avoiding vital organs at first to prolong agony. The sound of bones breaking echoed in the public squares, where crowds gathered not only to witness justice but also to be reminded of what awaited anyone who dared to challenge authority. This was no quick death. The wheel was designed to transform the human body into a grotesque sculpture of pain, twisted, broken, and unrecognizable, leaving a lasting mark not just on the victim but on the memory of all who dared to watch. And so, the wheel of agony remains not just a relic of brutality, but a reminder of how fear once ruled empires and souls alike. Every shattered bone, every twisted scream, and every final breath of those bound to its rim was more than punishment. It was a message to the living: obedience bought survival, and defiance paid in torment. Though centuries have passed, the memory of this cruel instrument still echoes through history's darkest chambers, whispering of an era when human suffering was molded into spectacle. And if this story has chilled your spine and opened your eyes to the shadows of our past, then don't let the darkness fade here. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like to keep these forbidden stories alive, and activate the notifications so you never miss the next descent into the macabre. The wheel may have stopped turning, but the tales of agony continue and you won't want to be left behind.